Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 8 of Over the Head podcast with Scott Ratliff and Kyle Hartzell. We got some PLL news to talk about today. Nat St. Laurent out as the Redwoods head coach, Joe Spallina in. We're doing GMs again, so we'll talk about that. Other like PLL news is some free agency stuff. They announced a new playoff format, which I think will be interesting to cover, and then we'll get into college lacrosse and who's number 2 in the college lacrosse landscape. Maryland continues to look dominant, and then a little bit of a slower week, so we'll get into some Q&A at the end. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool, man. Let's rock. So first story here, the headline, Coach Nat out as the Redwoods coach, really at the beginning of the PLL, started out hot. The Redwoods were in the first championship game. They had that kind of Notre Dame core that they kept together, and they were one of the more successful teams. And then, we've covered it on this show. It's been a tough 3 years. There's been some really interesting decisions with trades and free agents and kind of lacking identity. I think the big thing here, Kyle, is here they lose Rob in free agency. Free agency is now more or less over. We can talk about there's a couple of impactful players maybe available, but this move happens. I guess Nat resigns, and it leaves Joe Spallina, who they've hired as a GM, and whatever coach they hired, in a tough spot. You do have the college draft, but you miss out on the opportunity to kind of build a team through free agency. What are your thoughts, insight on how that all went down? What do you think?
Right, Nat was the face of that team. He's been there obviously since day one, and kind of sad to see him go, right? He's obviously passionate about the sport. His identity pretty much, was the Redwoods, and he just loved professional lacrosse, and it was kind of sad to see him go. But obviously there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with the free agency stuff, the Chris Gray trade. We talked about it last week. Atlas kind of, why are you trading your second overall pick in the 2023 draft? And we already hit on that, but red flags should go up, and it's.
Do you think, Kyle? Do you think that so? Do you think that the story comes out that Nat resigns?
Yeah,
we had talked about he's probably on the hot seat here going into this season. Is your impression that he stepped away? Is your impression that this was we think maybe this would be a good idea coming from the league? How do you think that played out in terms of a decision-making process?
Yeah, I haven't talked to anybody behind the scenes, but my gut is telling me there was some stuff going on. Maybe they told him he was in the hot seat, and he was kind of like, F you, resign, get out of there. Because, that's a tough pill to swallow, right? The league coming at you and saying, hey, you got a year to get it together here, and, it's either do that or resign. And I think he kind of leaned on that, was kind of like F you and just resigned, is kind of where I'm leaning on that. And yeah, man, it's and the GM thing, it's what, now there's 2 teams with GMs, there's other teams, the rest of the teams do not have GMs. So it's was that in play? Were they hey, we're hiring Joe Spallina and you're going to be the coach? And he was like, what? Wait a minute, and didn't agree with that. So I think it could be a bunch of things.
So for people who don't know too, Coach Nat, I think in the public lacrosse, unless you were one of these MLL guys, which as we both know, there aren't many. They're the fans who really followed it closely. He kind of came on the scene with the Redwoods at the start of the PLL, but he was an assistant coach on the Ohio Machine, and that team had a ton of success. Holman, Schreiber, Harrison, Pete Baum. They won, an
MLL
championship, went to another one. And, talking to those players coming into the PLL, he was kind of the guy from a coaching staff standpoint on that Ohio Machine team that I think did a lot of the drafting and was just really, one of the coaches that a lot of the guys looked to and really respected. So I think that's, for people who maybe didn't know or background, that's kind of how he leveraged that success to get this role with the Redwoods. And then it should be said, because we're probably about to be hard on him here for the next few minutes, a great first few years in the PLL. They were an overtime game away from winning the first championship. In the bubble, I think they lost to the Whipsnakes in overtime in the semifinals in the bubble as well, and could have been in another championship there. They were a competitive team with that original core. And this is what's interesting about the whole GM thing, because what really ended up being his downfall from my point of view was not the coaching. it was the team management. It was just that roster, as that initial roster and core that he had as guys started to retire and move on. He just wasn't able to put together the right mix of guys to kind of recreate, and build a new identity. And I agree. I heard some kind of rumblings. This is unconfirmed, that similar to what you said, he was getting pressure.
Who are your sources?
Yeah, not seeing eye to eye with the league, and that kind of led to him resigning. But there was also some pressure. This is like the sort of thing in the NFL. Like, we need like our own, Schefter, Diana Rossini. Like, this is the sort of thing the Athletic would like put out a story like dysfunction in Redwoods front office, and like there's probably some story, of like the PLL front office and him going at it and like how it leads to this. I mean, shit, same with Andy Towers. Like, there's been 2 now coaches leaving this offseason that are kind of shrouded in like, like what happened there? So we need some hard-hitting non-state media. I don't need to read the PLL website story about how this all went down. I need a third-party journalist to dig into this story and figure out like what the fuck's going on, and like, did he resign, and if so, why, and why at this time, right? Versus, was Joe Spallina coming in either way? Like, all of these questions I want answers to, but we need some serious journalists, and that's probably not going to be us.
Yeah, and like you touched on it, but like the chaos thing, like we kind of know what happened there. Like the staff, they wanted to get rid of the assistants, and Towers like, no, F that, and stepped down. So it does have similar vibes to that. Like, it sounds like there were some things going on behind the scenes that Nat might not agreed with, and was like, you know what, F this. I'm resigning.
Who's the guy? Is Dan Arestria? Is he the guy that kind of broke the chaos behind the scenes story? He's kind of one of those guys who is not state-run media, who will get like under the hood, And so maybe that's who we need.
Doesn't he? I think he might be TLN though, so I don't know. There might be some inner workings there. I
don't know. Is he? I don't think. I think he's independent journalist. We'll figure it out.
Maybe we need to have Dan on here then. But yeah, it'd be nice to have like maybe get Nat on here. Maybe we ask him. Maybe he's open to coming on, but. Shout out Nat. I mean, I know he's been, being talked about in a bad light the last couple of weeks with all this trade stuff and, resigning. But man, when I was looking for a team after I was cut by the Atlas, like he picked me up, and I'm so grateful for him for doing that. But it's tough to see him leave.
He had a great way of like believing in guys. I mean, he did the same thing with Rob. Like, we talked about it with Rob last week. He's the MLL MVP. Then he's in the abyss for a year in the MLL when the PLL starts. Then he has the bad season with the Atlas and gets traded, and like Nat and then he totally revamps him. He obviously gave you that opportunity as well and had good years there. So a lot more good than bad. Just unfortunately, like the writing was on the wall with this version of the Redwoods. They had a couple losing seasons. They lacked identity. They're losing free agents. It just seemed like, I mean, right, Garrett Epple left for the Cannons. That's like a leader on that team. Now Rob leaves. Like, that's just not a good sign when your core pieces are choosing to go other places. Sometimes change is best for all parties. It seems like that maybe is what happened here. So what do you think about, first off, Joe Spallina, another guy you played for? He was the coach and GM for the Long Island Lizards in the MLL for a long time. He's had a ton of success as a women's coach at Stony Brook, coaching the girls game. 2 questions. One, how do you think about that hire? What do you think about that hiring? And 2, though, like, the more interesting question to me is, how the fuck does this work? Like, is he hiring the head coach? Is he the boss? Who's the boss? Can
he hire himself as the coach? Can he be the GM and the coach?
So what do you think? What do you think about that?
No, Joe Spallina, what's really good, that a great thing that he does is he's great in free agency. He's great in getting guys on a team, like trades. Like, look at the Max Seaball, Paul Rabel trade, Rob Pinnell. I mean, that championship team that we played for, the pieces that he got on that team, even landing his brother, Brian Spallina, who was, that was his last year playing. But he's good. He's good in free agency. He's good at making trades. So I think you're about to see I actually think there will be a couple trades maybe before the draft, maybe trading some draft picks to maybe position himself a little bit. But you're already seeing him making moves, right? He's already signed 2 guys, but they're Team 91 guys on that. But in the Aiden Denenza,
I was laughing because if people, sorry to jump in, but if people listened to a few weeks ago, like, and I built my all lacrosse team, and it was like, basically all Long Island guys. that's like what the Redwoods are probably going to become.
That's where they're headed. That's where they're
headed. So for people who don't know, like Joe Spallina also coached his son, who's we talk about all the time, one of the best players in college lacrosse right now at Syracuse. They had like a legendary club team.
Yeah.
And his kid was actually a part of two of them. So Joey played up with like Brennan O'Neill's Team 91 club lacrosse team in Long Island. And those guys like never fucking lost. They were incredible. The Duke kid, what's his name?
Aiden Denenza or McAdory?
No, McAdory. Yeah. Like, all these guys that are now college lacrosse stars all played together for him. And it's the timing of him now coming back into pro lacrosse. It's like some of them are now in the league, Brennan O'Neill. Some of them, McAdory, are a year away. You just mentioned, what are the names of the two guys he picked up out of the player pool?
Denenza and D'Alto from Boston University.
Yeah, D'Alto and Denenza, both guys who I think came through that program. So it's like if you were in the club lacrosse circuit, and this is very like niche, at that time, I mean, you could look at some of those Team 91 teams and be like, yeah, this could be a pro team. Like they all were playing ACC or high level college lacrosse or committed. And now we're like at that stage where like he actually could literally just build his own little Team 91 pro unit, and it looks like that's kind of underway to some extent.
Yeah, and if you look at the Adam Lamberti's PLL mock draft that they just put out, Kavanaugh, who was slated to maybe go number 2, because like the California Redwoods, they had that Notre Dame dynamic, right? And that kind of picked some Notre Dame guys even recently in the Conlon, the defenseman they picked up last year, and now that Joe Spallina stepped in, they actually have McAdory maybe going at number 2, which kind of does make sense, right? They need an X attack. They need somebody that can draw slides, be a QB behind the cage. And like, is Chris Kavanaugh that guy that can do that? Arguably, maybe. But
is McAdory that guy? Like, he's not like Eric Molliver's behind the cage right now, too. Like, McAdory's a midi.
Yeah.
So I do agree. Like, I could see it. He's super athletic. Like, he looks like he's got a game built for the pros. It's crazy after last year's draft, looking through that mock draft, and it's like you have this crown jewel cursed, at the top, and there's other obviously like really interesting prospects, but it's definitely not as obvious like what you do in that first round behind cursed. There's not quite as much like clear star power, huge impact players year one. So it's gonna be he's gonna be really active. My biggest thing, and now this is gonna be repetitive to the conversation we already had, but like I want to know who the fuck is in charge.
Yeah.
Is Joe Spallina hiring a head coach? Is he leading the search? And again, this is not unique. This is in all sports. Like the Bears in the NFL, coach gets fired. Is the GM getting fired? Is he bringing in a new coach? Like, so this is a normal dynamic where when you have like a team owner, then you have like a GM and a coach, and are they tied together or are they separate? But I want some fucking reporting on that dynamic. Like, is Joe Spallina involved in the search for a head coach? Is he picking it? Is he getting paid more than the head coach? Like, who's in charge of that team?
Man, I want that whole sideline looking like an episode of The Sopranos. I hope they hire Muley, Spallina, Brian Spallina. I hope it's just a bunch of Italians over there.
Now here's one. If Joe's in charge, what about Brian as the head coach?
Yeah,
did you see that?
I could see that for sure. I'm sure Brian wants to get back into coaching, and he was just such a tremendous competitor, and I bet you that's not off the table for sure. He
used to just, when I was young in the MLL, he used to just talk so much shit to me. And I was obviously like, I was the type of guy that talked quite a bit of shit myself. So I brought it on myself. But I remember one year, like I was having like my breakout season in 2015. And of course I'm arrogant, young, like running my mouth every game. So again, I'm sure I deserve this, but like, him and I got into it in one game. He was notorious for like late slashes. So I'm sure he gave me one. I gave it back or something, said something to him. The next time we show up at Hofstra to play you guys, I guess you were on the team that year in 2015, I think, right?
Yep.
As soon as we come out for warm-ups, he's just standing at the midline yelling my name. You got the whole Lizards team. You guys are all warming up, like doing drills, and he's just not participating in the warm-up drills, just standing there going, Radley. I'm just like, fuck. Because like you just know what that means. Like it means I'm gonna get slashed late, like in the ribs or like it's just like, well, okay, I'll just have to deal with this, I guess. But he was a nut as a player. But everybody who played with him talks about, how
Matt
he was.
Yeah, Matt Danowski had a good story about him when he coached him at Hofstra. He's just like, he would just say he wasn't
John Danowski.
Yeah, John Danowski saying like he wasn't the best defenseman on the team, but he would talk so much shit and his hair was just down to his like, you know, he's like a crazy person and people just wouldn't dodge him. Just, you know, the way he swung his stick and just the intimidation factor that he said. But yeah, I would be interested to see, I mean, clearly if Joe Spallina is the GM, he's going to have some say in who he wants to run that team, I would imagine. I mean, again, we don't know, like to your point, who the fuck knows what's going on? Like, we don't know what the GMs are doing. We don't know if do they have can they just hire whoever the hell they want? Or is they got to go through a board committee? There needs to be more clarity on it, and there's not, and they need to figure that out because they need like a press release and like lay it out for us because I think we're not the only people that are like, what the hell's going on here?
I think the PLL needs, you know how like the president has a press secretary who like just stands up there and soaks fucking bullets on behalf. The PLL, like Paul and Mike need one of those because like they get so much shit, and we've, you know, some of it we probably maybe is deserved or whatever. A lot of it's not, but like they just need like a trained media, like, you know, person. Which again, not that there's a, you know, demanding thousands of media people standing there banging on their door for answers, but like somebody just come out here, come on over the head and let us ask you the questions to understand like how the decision-making process is working on GMs and how the structure is with GM and coaches. I gotta assume it goes the same way. The control will live with the board, Paul, Mike, Seth, you know, Rachel and the other lacrosse people that are on the board. My guess would be at the end of the season, the same way they assess coaches, they'll assess GMs. And now if you're like in the future, if you're looking at a team like the Redwoods and saying this team's struggling, maybe some of the player surveys are coming back and they're not great. The issue here is roster construction. Like we're firing the GM, not firing the coach. Yeah. You know, like if Nat is just coaching this team and he's not responsible for building this roster in a situation like I think it can all work, but I would love to really like understand how this is going. I'd love to understand who's leading the search for the next coach. You know, Anthony Kelly's a name that like has seemed to be in every conversation of coaches, but he's always kind of the, you know, he hasn't been hired for any of the roles. Like, are there any other names of coaches of guys that you know have like put themselves in process and have been considered for these jobs?
Yeah, I think a prerequisite for this new Redwoods team is going to be, hey, you've had to have coached a Team 91 team, or you're not going to be able to coach on the Redwoods. is my thought.
It's good. Oh, Italians only.
Italians only. What was your take on you got to have your last name as a vowel or starts with whatever?
First name ends in Y, last name ends in a vowel.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be for sure. But no, like Anthony Kelly, like he's been trying to get a head coaching job for a while. I mean, I had talked to Brendan Mundorf on the phone. He was interested in coaching. Kyle Sweeney was interested in coaching. So there's a lot of guys. I think they're going to have a long list of guys that want to do it. But again, like I just see Joe just hiring Long Island, like Muley. Like, could we see Chris Muley come back? You know, back in the day, Lizards, old school Lizards. Could we see him come back? Brian Spallina, you hit that. That's a good point. Like, is he going to come back? Like, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that in the next coming weeks. They announced that one of those guys.
You know whose name fits that perfectly? Nicky Polanco.
Nicky Polanco. Nicky Polanco and Brian Spallina and Chris Muley and Joe Spallina just lurking in the background.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting. And it's funny, too, because they're the California Redwoods. So it'll be like just totally like a long way from Long Island.
Yeah. And then they signed the Denenza kid and D'Alto. And then first thing I did last night was Google LinkedIn, and they're both finance guys, so it's like...
Yeah, but I don't know if that one's worth beating up on as much because they're player pool guys. I mean, that's a training camp roster spot, and if you show up and you play great, you make the roster, but it's not like you're trading your 5th overall pick for one of these finance guys. So they don't pass the LinkedIn test, but there's a different criteria for star player, role player, training camp roster guy.
For sure.
That is what it is. All right, so other news in the PLL, they announced the new playoff format. So all the teams will play each other. I'm going to do a bad job, but more or less throughout the regular season. They're not their conference records, but just their overall records will seed the team, but then they'll go into a playoff bracket based on East-West. So the number one team, do I have that right, or is it their conference record that will get them seeded?
So I think they said they play out of conference teams once, in conference teams twice. So on that. Yep.
And then it's their, like, if you're 4-1 in the conference, but you're 6-3 overall, and another team is 4-2 in the conference, but they're 7-2 overall, they're probably the high, like your overall record results in your seeding.
Yes.
In the playoffs. Yeah. Yes. So then when they get seeded, the top East team and the top West team will get a bye. Second and third East and second and third West will play each other. Then they'll have conference finals, right? And then the championship game will be a team East versus West. What do you think about that? There's been lots of talk about the playoff format, how many teams are making it when it's such a small amount of teams that play in the league in general. Do you like this? What do you think about this?
Yeah, and I'll just read this off the top. I'm pretty sure you said this, but top 3 teams in both the Eastern and Western Conference will qualify for the playoffs. The first 2 rounds of the playoffs will feature in-conference matchups to name a conference champion, culminating in the Eastern and Western Conference meeting in the championship game. So, seeding for each conference will be determined by overall win and loss record. So you actually hit that nail on the head. I actually like it.
You theoretically could have the second worst team in the league be in the playoffs if the worst team in the league is also in their conference. It's unlikely because of the way that they're going to play each other.
Yeah.
But it's the bottom feeder of each conference is out.
Yeah.
And then the other 6 teams make the playoffs.
No, I like it. I think having Eastern and Western conferences, however they split that up, and then ultimately those 2 best teams meeting in the championship, I think that's awesome. Because last year I like it too. Because last year was it Archers and the Water Dogs in the championship game, but I don't remember. Whip Snakes. I don't remember the playoff format. I know it was different, but I like it.
I don't remember either, but I do think it's the right thing to do. I think the good thing about the conferences and playing your conference opponents twice is it will create some rivalries. Early on in the PLL, they got these rivalries basically based on college. They tried to make the Atlas Whip Snakes a thing. It was Hopkins versus Maryland. First off, it wasn't, because there's a lot of other good players out there that weren't from those schools. But then what naturally happened was Whip Snakes Redwoods became a rivalry because they kept playing in big, really important, really good games, and they were the 2 best teams early on. I think this will allow us to get that. You're going to have 5-year stretches where there's clear teams battling at the top of each conference, and those teams playing each other twice in a season will be exciting, and then it'll leave a little bit more mystery around the championship game. We've only seen these 2 teams play once, and maybe it was way earlier in the year, and there's more kind of a Super Bowl. You don't always. So I think it's generally a good setup. I think they've done a great job of fixing some of the playoff problems. Having 2 teams not make the playoffs is good for regular season competition. It kind of avoids that chaos approach of none of these games fucking matter until the playoffs. And the Champ Series helps with that too. The top 4 teams qualify for the Champ Series. That does mirror more European soccer or football. But I think that's interesting. I think it's exciting. It gives you something to play for, and it's a chance to earn some money in the offseason and play more lacrosse. If you're on the bubble of that 4 or 5 going into the last game of the season, you're going to want to win that. So they've done a good job of making some changes to make the regular season kind of mean more and give you more storylines to follow, which is what it's all about. Yeah,
and then to piggyback off of that, they announced the 3 venues they're going to have, right? Minnesota being the quarterfinals. I love that stadium. I know that facility's awesome. You get the hotel's right there. You can walk right to it. It's an awesome venue. I'm glad they're doing it there. Great size. And then the semifinals, obviously PA, they show out well at Subaru Park. So it's good to see that go back. And then the finals, New Jersey. As soon as I hear the word New Jersey, I'm just not excited. I'm sorry for all you New Jersey people.
I've never even heard of it. SI Stadium in Harrison, New Jersey.
Yeah, Sports Illustrated Stadium in Harrison, New Jersey. Actually, I had to Google Harrison, New Jersey, because I don't know too much about Jersey. I couldn't tell you.
You looked at it on a map and you still don't know.
No, I just Googled. So what I just Googled was just the crime rate, because remember we played at Red Bull Arena, that hotel, my God.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, I don't know. We have to have Jerry Raganese come on here. He's a New Jersey, big New Jersey guy. Yeah. So
there's a lot of New Jersey. Obviously there's a lot of lacrosse in New Jersey, but what's weird about it is it's not a destination. Philly, people would go up to Philly PLL championship weekend, hang out in Philly. Nobody's taking a vacation to Harrison, New Jersey to come to that game. I wonder if that's an SI sponsorship thing. I wonder if it's a great stadium, but even if it's a great stadium, play the quarterfinals there or something.
Yeah, I'm not excited about that.
That's another one. I need the PLL press secretary out here so I can say, what the fuck is
Harrison, New Jersey. Yeah, that's an interesting. I don't even know what sports
airport do you fly into.
Newark. It's definitely Newark. I know Newark's right there. But sports.
Oh, so it's like New York City. It's like a New York City suburb type game.
Yes. Oh, the venue looks kind of pretty cool. So yeah, it's the same thing as the New York Red Bulls. Yeah, it's the same venue we played at. So
that's it.
Yeah, so they changed the name. Yeah, so it's the same exact. So that's not. Yeah, I'm all set on that one.
from a branding standpoint, some free advice they should just call it New York, like the way that the Giants and the Jets do. And the Red Bulls, like they're the New York Red Bulls, aren't they?
Yeah,
like,
New York Red Bulls.
Like come to Harrison, New Jersey for our league championship game. Like say come to New York City. So idiots like us don't read it. Like what the fuck is this? I'm not going to that. Like it's in New York City. Oh, we could do a little city trip, catch a show.
But it is
the game. It
is a cool stadium, but the surrounding area just not excited about it. So
again, that's fine. You can play there and stay in New York City. Like it's New York City. That's what it is. Look at it. It's right over the GM Bridge. Like it's in New York City. Like they need to brand it New York City.
Yeah.
You find a Newark airport for New York City and you stay in New York City and you go to the game on the train over there. Like the branding, we'll help with that branding consulting. This is a New York City championship.
I guess you got anything else on that? On the playoffs? Anything?
No, I think that kind of covers it. But we talked about it, but free agents, obviously Rob, kind of the big one to drop. Most guys re-signed to their teams. Any names, when we're talking about Joe Spallina, so like you called it, I agree, like watch out. You got a new GM, they don't have a coach, trades the Redwoods now, they have to be making moves. If you look at their roster, and he says this in his interview, they are defense heavy.
Yeah.
Like they've got that tall kid out of Virginia who I think like playing basketball at Stanford or something, right? But should be available next year. They've got the other kid from Delaware, the Canadian defenseman. I should know these guys' names. Kastner, I think, is the
Cole Kastner,
right?
Yeah,
and then
Cole
they
Kastner.
also have. I keep wanting to say Graham Hossick, Owen Grant.
Yeah, and then you got Chris Fake, Chris Conlon,
and so like then you have their whole starting defense from last year. Like neither of those two guys were there last year either.
Yeah.
You also have Jared Connors, playing LSM there. So like clearly they are like they have an abundance of long poles. They lost Rob. You're bringing back, Garnsey and Kirst and like some interesting pieces like on that offense, but like there's no clear identity on offense. So I would expect to see him move some poles for either offensive talent or draft picks in the coming weeks. So I think that'll be a storyline to watch. And then like are there any free? I mean, Chanachuk still hasn't signed. We don't know if he's going to play or not. Jules Henningsberg, to me,
he's the biggest one, right?
The proven, the number one proven asset. He was already on the Redwoods. Now that was a different.
Could go back.
Of the Redwoods.
Could go back.
So that that could be an interesting one.
Yeah, he's the only one. He's the only one on this list that I'm like, probably the best name available. Because the other ones are just kind of like Dylan Malloy. He's not signed with the Atlas, but like, yeah, it's like Jules Henningsberg. Could we see him go back to the Redwoods again? We don't know what those conversations are like with Spencer Ford and Colsey, but again, the GM coach thing, we don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, Jules Henningsberg's the biggest one, right? He could land maybe back on the Redwoods, but we'll see what happens.
Interesting
with that. So
okay, I think that covers it on PLL. Should we jump into some Cause Across and recap there?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, I looking in the past weeks of games, and we can get into it. I mean, definitely some interesting games, but I think the storyline that's most compelling is who's number 2. You've got Maryland, who just continues. I mean, they just cook Virginia. Like Virginia made it interesting a little bit, and then the fourth quarter, Maryland was like, okay, like
we're done here.
Yeah, they run away with that game, and we can talk about Virginia's problems, but clearly they're number 1. They're undefeated and an impressive undefeated. They've played a tough schedule, but then behind them, it's not obvious. Like you've got a bunch of one-loss teams. I think I saw on the most recent media poll, you got Penn State right at number 2. They obviously have a really good win over Cornell. You've got a 7-0 Army sitting there at number 3. Not really any, eye-popping wins, but they haven't lost, and they've looked really damn good in the way they've won. Cornell, their only loss coming to Penn State is right there. North Carolina with 1 loss, and then, you get into a couple 2-loss teams, but then you still have Duke with 1 loss. You have Ohio State with 1 loss, who is just looking better and better. It's really tough to say, like, who do you have right now as the number 2 team in the country behind Maryland, at this point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Army's undefeated, right? But you look at their schedule; they haven't had not one close game. Like every game, they're nowhere. A team's not even within 6 goals of them. Like so, their strength of schedule is a real issue for me.
Although UMass has been decent since that. That would probably be their best win, right? Would be UMass.
Yeah,
UMass. I think that's
they
their
beat
only loss,
16-9. I mean, but like it's for me, we'll know more about Army. I think when they
play BU this weekend, which has been kind of their that's been the team that takes them out of the Patriot League tournament. It has like stopped that, that's been the one team in the Patriot League that's really given them fits. I don't know Partsy, like who else in the Patriot. I mean, Colgate's okay. Like
so that's their next two.
Okay, so.
Yeah, that's their next 2 games, right? They got UNC travels to West Point. That'll be the game where it's like where do they stand? So that's next week, not this week, but the following week, and then they have Colgate after that.
UNC,
yeah, so Colgate will be the game where we're like, okay, they're the real deal, or they're UNC. I mean, UNC is really good too. So, but I don't know. Are they back? I don't know. We keep throwing that around. Oh him Duffy.
Yeah, oh him Duffy.
But like you said, I would probably put like, yeah, Penn State at 2. That I would probably, my number 2 right now would probably be Cornell. If I had to say a team, I'd say it's Cornell for me.
So that's me too. So I think now Penn State, let's give them credit. They won that game. So I think they probably deserve it to be number 2 in the polls. But like that was a game Cornell like had a stranglehold on, and then like if you play that game 10 times, I'm picking Cornell to win 7 of them probably, right? So like I think we see that the same. I think Penn State deserves a ranking. The Big Ten schedule is going to be a gauntlet. Like those teams are going to beat up on each other. I could see Cornell running through the Ivy League. Like we just saw them handle Princeton pretty comfortably. And for my money, Princeton's the clear number 2 best team in the Ivy League. So like if I'm projecting out, I think Cornell likely has a better run through their conference than a Penn State does. Yep. So I think that they're probably going to be a better pick to end up maybe in a higher seed come tournament time. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, man. Like if let's say Army gets through this slate, let's say they beat, which by the way wouldn't shock me. Like I would expect them to beat BU and Colgate, and let's say they upset UNC, which like I don't think that's going to shock anybody if that happens. We could be talking about an undefeated season for Army. Like that's not out of the question.
I think if they get past UNC, depending on how big of a win it is, I don't see them losing.
I mean, you got to play the games. Like the teams in the Patriot League are good enough. Like Loyola's 0-6 and 7, but they lost to Maryland by 1 goal. You just don't you got to play the games. But I wouldn't put it past it. And if you're undefeated Army coming out of the Patriot League, you got to assume Maryland's going to lose a game somewhere in here in the Big Ten, schedule. Like, could we be looking at Army 1 seed going into the NCAA tournament? That would be nuts.
Yeah, but strength of schedule is thrown into that, right? So I don't think
it is, but still, undefeated is undefeated. Like if you're 1 loss Maryland, maybe, but if all these other teams beat up on each other and have 2 or 3 losses, I mean, when I was in 2012 Loyola, we were 1 loss and we got the 1 seed and we were in the ECAC. I mean, we did play Denver a couple times, but it wasn't like we were playing an ACC schedule. I mean, when you're, if your win-loss is that good, it's hard to deny to some extent.
And then the other interesting one is like, looking at CUSA's schedule, like they play Manhattan tonight during this podcast. And when it comes out, they're going to crush.
We should hustle and watch that.
They're going to crush Manhattan. But dude, their schedule after that, right, is like Colgate, Virginia, Notre Dame, Cornell, Duke, UN. They finish with UNC and then the ACC tournament after that. Yeah. So that's going to be some good games for sure.
This is going to be a tough time for me because I'm just going to react every week to what I saw. And every other week I'm going to have a completely different opinion on every one of these fucking teams because they all play each other. They're going to win some. They're going to lose some. I don't know if my brain can handle it. Like Maryland's the only one. Don't bet against Maryland. Yeah,
and then the team we haven't really mentioned, Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame ain't going anywhere. They're gonna emerge as one of the contenders. Obviously, they lost to Maryland. They lost to that Ohio State team. And I thought for some reason we talked shit about Ohio State after when they lost to Utah. I thought they had like 6 losses.
I was ready to fold the program. Like we were
calling for Myers' head after that.
I know they're 8-1 and like some impressive wins. Like
sorry, Coach Myers. Apologies.
We were. we were a little early on that one. They look really good. Like again, to me, they should be higher in the rankings. Like I get it, Utah's not a great loss, but 8-1 wins over Virginia, now wins over Notre Dame. Did they just like cook Denver or something this past weekend?
Yeah, beat them handedly. Beat them handedly.
Denver, they suck.
Yep.
So that's that. But still, like good job, Ohio State. Sorry.
Yeah. And Duke, right? Quiet. Richmond's good, right? They beat Richmond in OT. I think that it was at Richmond, so I think that's a good win for them. They're quiet, right?
This is what I was talking about with Richmond. They beat Virginia, who's proving to not be good. They lost to Cornell by 1. They lost to Duke by 1. They're clearly like, it's not a fluke. They're a top 15 team.
Yeah. But
with their conference, they've now put themselves back in the situation where you have to win the conference or you're not going to make the tournament.
Yeah.
Like you got to, so it's tough for them. Like that game's in overtime. They had the ball. They had a chance to win it at the end of regulation. They had, I think 2 chances to win it or something like that in overtime. It was actually the opening possession of second overtime off the face-off. You being a wing player guy, hard C, they just lose contain. If you're a coach listening and you're coaching wing play, you got to stay north-south. You got to have one guy south defense and one guy north. You can't get east-west because it's like you can't give up a fast break. And now I'm going on a total tangent. We need to clip this with video or something. But you can't give up a fast break after a ground ball scrum. Like it's one thing if a Fogo pinch and pops, okay, but like it was a scrum, and the Richmond defenders kind of just get tilted a little bit sideways, and it breaks out into a little like 2v1, and he jumps forward and takes the ball and he flips it ahead to another guy and he runs down and scores a game-winning goal. And it just, as a wing play guy, it really frustrated me because it was just like bad wing play discipline, in my opinion. First, not staying north-south, then jumping upfield instead of just turning and running in the hole. But I digress. Richmond, a chance to make a statement. They don't. And you're right. Like Duke, not overly splashy or impressive, but again, here they are with 1 loss. Let's see how the gauntlet of ACC plays goes.
Yeah, and then like I don't think they necessarily will have to win the ACC. They have coming up, right? They have their next game's Denver, right? They win that one. We expect them maybe to win that one. We'll see. Notre Dame, if they were to beat Notre Dame, and then Carolina, Syracuse, right? Those if they win those games, they're in. But yeah,
well, they're. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if you're looking at the ACC right now, the team that's sitting there not in is Virginia.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Cuse, UNC, there's a world where Notre Dame, Cuse, UNC, and Duke all make the tournament.
Yeah.
I'm not a math guy. Maybe that's impossible with, 16 spots and but like those 4, 5 all look like tournament teams. Maybe one of them gets left out, and that's what we'll suss out in the ACC. Is it Cuse? Is it Duke? Is it UNC? Like that's going to be really competitive. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm ready for conference play. I'm ready to get into some of these games.
Yeah.
Do
the Terps
of these random matchups?
Do the Terps lose to Michigan this week?
No. Did Michigan just lose no, Michigan's not. Michigan's not good.
And let's talk about, UVA, man. I think we should start talking about next year for them because like it's Sunderland and Millen combined for 2 points. I think McCabe had 1 assist. He was like 0 for, I don't even know what the final stat sheet was, but 0 for 7, 8 shooting. And then Sunderland had 1 goal. So like and then in that first half, it looked like they were going to come back, right? They were down 5-0 and they battled all the way back, had a couple huge transition goals. I'm like, okay, now there's going to be a game. And then Joe Walters in between the pipes,
Maryland's
effortless, him catching like bounce shots, just catch him in the stick, outlet, like. Yeah. Again, Terp Nation, I apologize.
You're going to have to start calling him by his name. You've now made this switch from just hating on him and him wearing 1 to not acknowledging that, but then not calling him by his name.
Yeah, it's bad. And then they have, like, in this mock draft, like, I don't even see him until the 3rd round. They have another goalie, the Penn goalie, ahead of him.
Oh, yeah, that makes no sense.
I know he's good. The Penn goalie's good, but I don't know if I'm passing on McNaney.
Is he for sure senior draft eligible? Like, yes, he's
on here. He's on here.
Oh yeah,
but they have him as the 2nd best goalie, which maybe I don't know. I haven't seen much of Penn, so
who's doing the mock draft?
Number 24. Yeah, I don't know, but it was interesting to see that. But yeah,
it is because right now you could give him the Toward.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Last year Pat Cavanaugh got it, deserved. Like, but like, you easily could have made an argument for Entenmann on that team last year as well.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, Kirst is
like Kirst. Yeah,
he was 6-2. I think he was 6-2, breaking the record this weekend.
Yeah, you're right. So it's Kirst. It's probably Kirst's award to lose, but still, like that Maryland team is so good, and he's clearly, you watch the games with your eyes, he is the best player.
Yeah,
like he 100%. Is just so nice in the cage and playing with so much confidence. Virginia, that's where we started this on. So are these like, I got a text asking that, was all of Lars's success there with Dom's recruits? Like, because COVID lengthened some careers. Again, not a math guy, so I don't know, like Matt Moore, Jared Connors, like, was that crew Dom recruits or was that crew Lars recruits?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I should have prepped this. Like, I'm asking questions that we don't know the answers to.
We should ask our UVA news source, Adam Gittleman, for that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just interesting because it is not good there right now, and they've continued to get obviously really highly rated recruits. It's very surprising to see them dip this much, just by the nature of who they are. Like, you think a down year for UVA is losing in the quarterfinals. Right?
Yeah, and then they lose to the Terps, and then they have see on Instagram, Coach Tiffany's asking for money for the whatever that was. But
yeah, there's a video where he's getting on there. I guess that's asking for NIL money.
NIL money. Yeah.
They're trying to buy new players. That's why we can't beat Maryland and Richmond. Like,
what message is that sending? What message is that sending to your current players on the team the day after the loss? You're asking for money to get new players. That's not good.
Yeah, it's not good. You need to put, like, the media team needs to put that video out after a win. Like, we just beat Syracuse here. Donate money to the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's look, they'll be fine. He's a good coach. The program is elite. They're going to keep getting good recruits because Charlottesville's awesome. It's a great school. It's a great tradition. Like, but it's, let's kick them while they're down. Like, they've been up so much in the last 5 years. Like, it's nice to be like, yeah, Virginia sucks. Next question.
Yeah. And then you touched on it, but like Cornell's statement win versus their rival, Ivy League rival, Princeton, cursed 5-2. Like, that kid, man, he's going to be a problem in the PLL. And like, again,
all-time goals record.
Mike French.
A program that had Rob Pinnell, Jeff Teat. The record was held by Mike French, who did it in 3 seasons.
And who was there?
Graduated in 1976.
Shout out my Philadelphia Wings owner back in the day.
Owned the Philadelphia Wings. So crazy record by him to last this long. And yeah, cursed. I mean, we can't, like, what more can you say? Like, that family is just so awesome.
Are they the greatest lacrosse family in the sport right now?
It's right now.
Bro, they're all in the pros. How many Stanwicks had?
Cool part of.
Go ahead.
What a cool part of our game that there are so many, like, family stories, like from the Gates to the Pals to the Thompsons to the Stanwicks. Like, there's a lot of competition, but they are, like, with him now, the thing that they were probably missing was that crown jewel player, the Lyle,
Yeah.
But they're deep. Their roster is deep.
Yeah.
Of good curse. Like Cole, I mean, they got PLL stars now. They got guys at every position, and now they've got the best player in college lacrosse. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years he's the best player in all of lacrosse.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, like, Stanwicks, right? You had Steele, Wells, Wellington. Wellington was his name, and then Shackelford, Shaq Stanwick, Wells Stanwick, Steele Stanwick, all played in the league at the same time, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, the Kirsts, next year you have, it's 4 of them, all playing, and they play in the NLL, and yeah, it's gonna be cool to see all of them playing on the same. They all have smiles nonstop. I've never seen them.
Oh, that's part of why they're so likable. I mean, they are charismatic, kind. I broadcasted for the Swarm one year, my first year, in retirement, and. No, it was actually my last year playing, and I just did some NLL broadcasting, and I got in an elevator. So Connor Kirst was on the Swarm, and him and I don't know what one of the other Kirst brothers was in the elevator, and I get in there and
Colin the goalie.
Yeah, it's Colin. Yeah, and they're like, "Hey, Scott, great job with the broadcast. Our whole family sits around the TV and watches the game, and we just love listening." It made me feel it was the most sincere compliment I had ever received. It made me feel so good. I was just like, I fucking love these guys. They're just so nice. And Rob talked about it, like, CJ just like oozes that, like, kindness, uplifting energy, positivity. It's awesome. He's awesome.
He started following the podcast, so shout out the Curse family. Cool. There we go,
nice.
baby.
Yeah, shout out the Curse family. They didn't no girls though. That's where, like, and I guess the Pals didn't, the Thompsons didn't, the Stanwicks, some great female players in the mix. So if we're gonna do a Mount Rushmore of lacrosse families, it's something to consider.
Stanwicks probably have that one, I would imagine.
Yeah, one of those Curse boys probably needs to marry into WLL or something.
There we go. Yeah, but then we got, the upcoming college slate. I mean, not a ton of games to talk about, but one that I'm circling is the Penn State-Ohio State game, right? That's going to be all the shit we've talked about. Ohio State, obviously, they're good, and Penn State number 2. Are you number 2? We'll find out on Sunday when they play Penn State or Ohio State, Penn State. And Q's Colgate, I think that's going to be a more interesting game than you think. Remember last year they had that was a defenseman like wrapped someone up and almost took their head off, threw them on the ground. There was like a scrappy fight.
A little skerfuffle.
Yeah, so I think Colgate's a better team they were last year, so it'll be interesting to see. I bet you that game starts out a little chippy. It'll be interesting to see where it goes on that one. So.
Yeah, and just with Cuse, I just think fun to keep watching. Like, same with UNC. You like, just, are you getting better? I think I've talked about this with them, Cuse, UNC, and Hopkins, all 3 of those teams. Like, they've been on this kind of can they break through train for a little while, and none of them have. They all seem to be good enough, but it's who's going to improve the most of those 3 teams over the course of the season is going to be the one that breaks through. Right now, UNC looks like that team to me, but I do still, like, man, when you watch Q's, I still see it. I think it's in there. So this would be a good chance for them to, like, not have a Harvard performance. Like, you're playing a pretty good team. Like, you should be better. Go take care of business. So I agree that'll be fun to watch.
And then the last 2 would be obviously not Cornell. Was it Princeton and Harvard play? That'll be an interesting one. And then Utah, Virginia. I'm interested to see kind of how that one goes.
Yeah, how far have we fallen here, UVA? Like, that's what that's all about. And then look, I wanted to just bring this up because you're all over them, but like, if you're Princeton, like, they didn't even really sniff it against Cornell.
No.
They didn't really sniff it against Maryland either.
Yeah.
Now, they did beat Duke and they beat UNC, but, like, it's just like I know they have a lot of seniors. They have, like, kind of a lot of star power on offense, but they seem to be in this, like, tweener tier where it's like they're beating the other tweener teams, the UNCs of the world, the Dukes of the world, but they're not even really competing with a Cornell and Maryland. It'll be interesting to me to see, like, where they end up. Not sure, like, what's up there, but I expected them to. Maybe it hurt them playing Cornell coming off of that Penn State loss. Like, Cornell came out of that game, like, jumped on them early, so that could be part of it. But, like, they're another one now that I put in that same bucket of, like, you've got the pieces, but you got to get better if you're gonna make a Memorial Day run. Yeah,
and then the other team we haven't mentioned was, that was in the thick of things in the beginning, is Hopkins, right? They played Rutgers this week, but they're another team. Yeah, exactly. But we'll see where they need to get healthy, right? They had some guys out, but they'll be in the thick of it at the end. So.
Yep. Okay. So we've got some Q&A. I think we covered most of the major storylines, and so some good questions. I'll just start and kind of ask you the first one, Kyle, which is, what changes have you observed in pro lacrosse since you started, and, like, where do you see the sport heading in the next 5 years? And so I think this is a good question. Like, we obviously both saw the evolution of pro lacrosse from MLL to PLL. What do you think is the most different from when you started? I mean, 20, 30 years before me, even. and where the game is today, and the league that, the CJ Kirst is stepping into next year.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, obviously MLL, PLL, right, is the salary difference. I think now, the max salary at the MLL was $16,000. Now it's, I think, 25 is the threshold, and then it goes up from there, depending on
25 is the minimum.
Is the minimum now. And then, guys are doing more guys are doing it full time now, right? You see guys that are playing NLL, NLL, PLL, and then also have camp businesses, and they're doing a lot of more guys are doing full time lacrosse. I'm seeing now than I saw when I was playing in the MLL, because if you're making $16,000, you obviously have a full time job, and there was a lot more full time job guys playing lacrosse, and I think you're starting to see guys with endorsement deals. There's way more eyes on the sport now with social media. When I was just getting out of college, Facebook was just a thing. So now it's I think there's way more eyes on the sport, endorsement deals, sponsorships. So I think the professionalism of the sport and being a legit thing, something you can actually do full time, is one of the biggest changes I've seen over the last 15, 20 years of the games. I think the next 5 years, I think it's just primed to just keep climbing and going in that direction, because, obviously, with the ESPN deal for the PLL, there's, every weekend there's ESPN on ESPN Plus on the main. So it's awesome to see that. And just, the biggest thing is just the full-time of it, seeing more guys do it full-time, which is cool to see.
I think it's interesting for people who maybe aren't in the, inside baseball, like in the inner circle of pro lacrosse, to really understand the economics. So 16K was the max, right? So you were, I'm sure, a max guy, but most players were making the rookie salary when I came into the MLL was 6 and the max was 16, and those numbers stayed the same until the PLL started, and it sounds like they were that kind of the same when you started too. So what did that look like? So most players were making 10K playing salaries, and then my first ever sponsorship, I was the 9th overall pick in the draft. Loyola had won a national championship, was $2,000. So I got I was making 6K on my rookie deal, and then I got $2,000 from String King, or from Maverick, I think was the first one I signed for a year or something to use their gear. Now, at that time, Paul was the $1 million guy with his, with Red Bull and Warrior. You had already kind of, I don't want to speak for what the size of your deals were, but there were guys with sponsorship deals. Let's put Paul in a separate bucket, because he was clearly completely in a league of his own, but kind of the next tier of star players like yourself at that time, 20, 30, maybe even something 50, something at the very high end with some of these brands like Warrior and stuff like that were really investing into it. But that was a 5 guys. That was a small handful of guys that were getting those sort of endorsement deals. And that was really it. So then behind that, it was whatever your job is, and more people were starting. Club lacrosse was starting to become a thing. So more people were doing that, where I think some of that has changed with the PLL is, one, you talked about it, the salaries. And then also, by the way, when I quit my job and did lacrosse full time, I then had to pay for my own health insurance. We didn't get benefits in the MLL. So
that's
that was $12,000 or something. I remember I was paying out of pocket. So there's my entire income that I'm making from my other stuff. So then I have a couple really good years, and I was like you, kind of willing to be active on social media and put myself out there, and that helped. And I started doing lacrosse full time and coaching club, and brands saw value in that. It wasn't just what I did as a player, but I was in front of high school kids all day, every day. So having their gear was valuable even in that sense. So then I got into that same tier of okay, I'm making 15 as a player, and I'm making another 20 or 30 off sponsors. So, and then you can make another 50 or 100 or whatever you want to make as a coach or running camps or doing whatever. So that was kind of maybe the more typical, or you had guys that just had full-time jobs and played and made their normal salaries and then made a little extra cash and played on the weekends. That was kind of standard. What the PLL did was included health insurance, which, for me was the same thing as 12K more.
Yep.
Put guys, the top tier players. I think my biggest contract in the PLL was north of 40. And then once they kind of reset it with the new free agency model, it was more 35.
I think everybody year one was I was 40, 45.
Yeah, exactly. And then it kind of came down a little bit once the competition was gone, and they,
I remember everybody was they're oh, salary caps, this is going to be awesome. I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
your salary's about to get whacked.
Exactly. So now it's 25 to 35 seems to be the range that guys live in. But then they create opportunities. So brands that buy into the league can sponsor guys for any amount. So same thing there. You got guys that are getting big sponsorship dollars, and then you got guys that are getting smaller ones. One of the things they did that I really like is, if you're a brand, so I was a String King guy. String King didn't buy into the league at first. If I wanted to use String King, they had to pay me 25K or more. So if you wanted to not be a sponsor of the PLL, but you wanted a PLL athlete to use your stuff, there's a minimum number they had to pay you for you to be able to use their stuff in the league. So it incentivized brands to pay guys what they were worth, basically. So stuff like that, like, and then all of the media assets. Again, if you're trying to get sponsorship dollars to supplement your playing income, the way that their media team operates and the visibility you can get online makes all of the players more valuable. So that, again, if for guys who are trying to do it full time, there's way more opportunity to go get sponsorships and to put yourself out there and build a brand. And then the last thing I'm going to say is there's also a lot of guys who don't want to do that, who don't want to be on social media all the time, who don't want to, like, you know, promo code whatever for, you know, like, and those guys can make a full-time living playing lacrosse now too. And frankly, like with the NLL, like when you have both leagues and you're a guy like Tom Schreiber, who obviously you're the best player in the world and like you're going to get paid well by sponsors anyway, but, or like Graham Hossack would maybe be a better example. He's not a household name. He played at Lindenwood. He's not, you know, but he's one of the best players in both leagues. Yeah. You know, he can get some decent money from sponsors, and then he's going to get max deals in both of those leagues because of how good of a player he is. And yeah, he's playing lacrosse year round, but like there's enough to make a decent living where, yeah, you still probably have to supplement your income somewhat depending on what your, you know, financial goals are, but it's not like you have to go take a full-time job if you don't want to. You can do, you know, you can set up your schedule and do a handful of camps and appearances, and that combined with playing is going to ultimately be enough. So they really made that much more realistic. The PLL has, just based on how they've kind of empowered the players from that standpoint. And
then the darlings of lacrosse. You know, I don't want to keep talking about Marcus Holman because F him, but like him and Alex, you know, they got a lot of mutual partnerships and they're doing a really good job social media. And
totally, if you do want to brand build, like it's a great platform to do it. I mean, they compete with, in their online presence, they compete with the big leagues. Obviously, we don't in terms of TV viewership yet, but like in terms of YouTube and, you know, social, like they put up numbers that rival NBA teams. So there's like tons of opportunity if you are willing to kind of engage in it and do it, and if that's your personality. So I wouldn't like really highlight anything super different. I agree, and maybe the only thing I would just add to that is I just think the level of play has risen. You know, and it's always been good. This is not like to put down like the past. I mean, like it's always been super fucking competitive from when you came into the league to when I came into the league. Guys cared. It's the best players in the world, but naturally, the more you have the full-time approach, the more professional your surroundings are, the more professional the preparation becomes. And one thing, Kyle, that I think the coaching has gotten significantly better.
Oh yeah.
And that goes hand in hand with the pay. Like the MLL coaches, I mean, God knows what they were getting paid, but there weren't a lot of guys who like could really command a locker room, you know, and some of those MLL teams, I'm not speaking for everybody, but some of them were. Now it's like, now you've got very legit, you know, head coaches and coaching staffs in the PLL. And so I think that's also elevating the level of play. The better the coaching gets, the more demanding, the more competition. So I think the level of play has gotten higher over the years, and that's all sports. I mean, that's how it goes.
The focus on fitness, right? I mean, there's not many guys that are out of shape in the league. And I think you saw maybe a couple guys that were, you know, MLL, NLL back in the day. You don't see many of those anymore. So for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of where it's going, I mean, I don't know. You can look, the obvious is like, you can look at it and be like, hopefully they go to home markets and this and that. Look, I love the league. I believe in it. I maybe have I hate to say it, a little bit more of a pessimistic view. Like, I think it's just going to be a long journey.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like they're not selling out stadiums. Like, you know, so I think there's a lot of room to grow, but all the decisions they're making now is starting to go to the home markets and hopefully eventually landing there. I think what we'll likely see behind that is we'll see some independent ownership come in. So starting to sell off franchises to different ownership groups and start to make it look more like a traditional professional sports league. But realistically, until player salaries are six figures, it's not going to, you know, you're not going to move guys to cities and you're not going to be practicing 5 days a week. And so I think they're, you know, I don't know. I don't think we're 5 years away from that. I think that's probably more like 10 to 15. Yeah. But I think they're doing all the right things to get there. It just takes time. You got to keep watering. You got to let the, you know, the numbers in lacrosse and the young generation grow up and be, you know, wallet carrying spenders of money who have watched pro lacrosse their whole lives. And that's when that could start happening. That's kind of my take.
For sure. What do you think? You want to ask about more?
Yeah. there were a couple others. Maybe I'm
Go for it.
curious. I like the one, is there we kind of had this, we had Rob do this, but like, is there a coach or a player who, has made an impact in your career worth calling it out? Like, who's been somebody that you've been around, teammate, coach you've played for, who, as you now look back, retired, that you'd say like, man, this was a person who really changed the course of my career and helped you a lot?
I would say, I mean, if I don't go to Salisbury, I don't think any of this happens via my long 16-year career. I think, Jim Berkman was a great motivator when I got to Salisbury and kind of instilled me with my psychotic work ethic and how he motivated me. But like another guy there was Eric Martin. He graduated before I got there. But I heard stories about him in the MLL, how he's one of the best defensemen as a D3 player. And that was somebody I always was like, okay, if he can do it, like there's another guy that came to Salisbury and did it. Like those are the shoes or the footsteps I want to follow in. So for me, it's, my college, getting to, walking on at Salisbury, and then ultimately Jim Berkman was the guy that lit a fire under my ass to go play professional. And having a guy that was there at my alma mater, Eric Martin, we all know who he is. He was one of the greatest outdoor players.
Do we all know who he is though? Like, you and I know who he is.
Yeah.
and we love him, but
yeah.
does everybody know him? I'm glad we're talking about him.
Yeah.
Legacy dies the last time your name is muttered, so it's good to keep him, relevant.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, that year I was in San Fran, Brody Merrill got the Defensive Player of the Year, but in my opinion, he was the best defensive player in the MLL when he was in San Fran. He was just, he was absurd, right? He was I think that year in the All-Star game, we're going to clip up some clips of this, but him with a short stick scoring goals behind the back, just running down the field in the All-Star game, like he was just an animal. And
the first time I ever encountered Emart, Kyle, was I was in college at Loyola. I was like a sophomore, and I had a teammate, Will Fredericks, who was from San Francisco. And in the summer, there's this big tournament out there in Tahoe. So he's like, come out one summer, hang out with me in the city, and then we'll go out and we'll play in Tahoe. Okay, great. So I play on this team, his club team or whatever, his team called West Sunset, all these San Francisco guys, and we go out to play in Tahoe. And I'm sitting there watching a game of like, the other good team that we're going to have to play out there. And there's this dude just baseball bat swinging, like breaking people's wrists and hitting people in the shins. And it's like, this is supposed to be like Tahoe, drink beers, chill, play some lacrosse. And they're like, oh yeah, that's Eric Martin. I was like, I've heard of this freaking guy. He was like on the cover of Lacrosse magazine at one point and all this stuff. And yeah, he was just, and I was so scared of him. I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not getting whacked. Like we talked about Spallina. I'm like, okay, this is an MLL game. He's yelling at me, I'll get whacked. If that guy comes near me in the Tahoe tournament, I'm not going anywhere near the ball.
Yeah.
And then obviously you and I have had a chance to play with him, get to know him. Great dude. So
yeah, we'll queue up some clips of him. But yeah, I'd say Jim Berkman at Salisbury, he's the one that stands out to me. And then obviously Eric Martin was the other one. But how about you?
So for me, there's too many names to count in terms of obviously people that helped me get there. But just what first came to mind is, it was kind of an interesting thing where my pro lacrosse career was just really tied to two guys, but I'll talk about one first, which is Will Manny. So like Loyola and UMass in 2012 both go on these crazy runs. Manny was like a finalist for the Tewaaraton. UMass was undefeated. They ended up losing in the playoffs. We obviously didn't, but that was like the first I'd heard of him. And we both kind of had similar stories. We're at these like typically not top 5 schools. And at one point we were co-number ones in that season. Then we both got drafted to the Cannons. We both kind of started our pro career at the same time. We both had like good rookie years, but not really breakout players. And he just had like a great belief in me and understanding of how I like to play the game. And my kind of ability to break out in pro lacrosse is a guy who's capable of scoring a lot of goals. And like, I mean, if you went back and looked at my stats, like the amount of, if I had 20 points in a season, I would be willing to bet that 80% of them were either an assist to him or a goal I scored off a pass from him. And so like he empowered my ability to be successful, especially on offense in like so many different ways, because he just was really great at running the 2-man games and the yo-yos, and he was back cutting. And we just kind of had a playing style that really complemented each other. And we had like tons of great moments in all-star games together, making plays. A little fun fact, we never lost an all-star game. We played in like 7 of them together. We won every time. And so and then obviously we separated for a few years and then reunited on the Archers. But I just think like my ability to make a name for myself in the sport, and like a lot of the highlight plays I had and things that, going back to this, allow me to get some sponsors and like go after this full time. He was like, I don't know that I make a lot of those plays with any lefty over there. Like he was the guy that I was working with in a 2-man game scenario who like saw the field and saw the game the same way I did. And so that really brought out the best. And then the other one was Adam Gittleman. Same thing, teammate on the Cannons, teammate on the Blades, teammate on the Archers. That was my roommate, my teammate for the entirety of my professional lacrosse career. And Gitz and I talked about it, but like we tried some crazy things. Like in the Blaze years, we came up, you know, us and Dave Huntley came up with the scheme to keep me on offense the entire game. And we had all these Canadians. So we ran like box lacrosse 5-on-5 offense. And I just stayed at the top. And, you know, Gitz had all these theories that he convinced me to try out. And that, you know, down my long pole one season, he played with headphones in, he was switching hands. We were double polling every team at different times. Like there were just so many different strategies that Gitz and I deployed. But it's the same thing I'd say about Will. Like it's just a guy who saw the game the same way I did. Like I can still hear his voice like yelling flare like certain slide packages. But when you get to play with guys like that who like there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat to like win lacrosse games and be good. When you get around players who see it the same way you do and want to play the same style that you want to play, it allows you to be at your best. And that's why lacrosse, it's not a sport where like the player's top 50, this is the best player, this is the best player. Like it's different year to year because your environment matters, your teammates matter, your coaches matter, the system you're in to highlight your strengths or weaknesses matter. So those were two guys as players that brought out the best in me for sure, and like allowed me to play in a way that I was really comfortable playing and like to play. So yeah, those are the two guys for me that jump out.
Hell yeah.
All right. Well, we are through another week. Still no answer on who's in charge.
The PLL?
Yeah. GMs or coaches, but we'll go back. We'll go get some answers. I want an investigation. Anybody out there that's listening, independent journalist, let's figure out what's going on.
Please tell us, because we have no clue what's going on.
All right, that's all we got. Peace.